boy. I am a boy.
I think this is the biggest problem facing the country. And I want to try and ensure that the kids of today are trained with the skills of tomorrow. It's no good training them with the skills that gave their fathers and grandfathers jobs. It's like generals fighting the battles of yesteryear. And that is the reason why we've pushed ahead with computers into schools. We now have computers in every secondary school in Britain. By the end of this year, it'll be 3/4 of all primary schools. No other country in the world has got that degree of penetration. I want youngsters, boys and girls, leaving school at 16 to actually be able to operate a computer. And a lot of their lives are going to depend upon that.
It's a message we've heard rather a lot recently. We've got to take on the new technologies or go under. Above all, we've got to make today's children computer literate because they are inheriting this new information technology world. The computer has transformed some jobs and removed the need for others. Computers have already dramatically changed the way some children can interact with the world. If a Braille machine is coupled with a voice synthesizer and a word processor, blind children can exercise their writing capabilities to the full.
Just change the question and have to add some more data lines.
Yeah. You got to do that every time.
In general education, lots of people are claiming that learning to program a computer is good for the head, in the same way that learning Latin used to be good for the head. This is the computer literacy machine in action. Pupils can now go for the new technology courses. And a lot of money is being spent on new machines, new buildings and extra, specially qualified staff. In the words of Kenneth Baker's promise, the kids of today are being trained with the skills of tomorrow.
Now, you go back up to...
Can we make it wider?
There are other claims for the computer in education. It will transform relationships between pupils and teachers. Learning will become a cooperative act, and the old authority patterns will vanish.
You're good at this.
The public story is always related to improving the quality of education. But it's hard not to suspect that there is an interest in saving money by replacing teachers altogether. If all goes well, eventually we won't need schools at all. They will simply lie empty and unused. The children are all at home, living and learning in the bosom of the family.
I like my mum and dad.
The public promises that politicians make about education make me nervous. I get especially uneasy when they deal with the areas I understand: information technology and computers. This programme began with a promise, a boast and an implied threat from Kenneth Baker. The promise is that British school leavers will be able to operate computers. The boast is that Britain leads the world in school computer ownership. And the threat is you don't get tomorrow's jobs without tomorrow's skills. The promise is very vague. What does learn to operate a computer mean? Switch it on? Ask it questions? Program it? The boast is silly. Britain leads the world in underpowered microcomputers. And the threat is just perverse, because it is not true that using your school's new British micro leads straight to your new British job. Bev White, like many teachers, has had to disillusion parents on this score.
Print. Quite a lot of parents seem to think that just sitting in front of a computer is going to guarantee their children are going to get a job. Certainly being familiar with using computers for various activities is good for them. But then on the other hand, not everyone is going to be using computers, not everyone's going to be programming with computers.
Advertising is now trying to push computers in the same way that the encyclopedia was pushed years ago at the door. Buy your child this and all his problems will be solved. Worse than that, in a sense, I think they're making the parents feel guilty if they don't buy them. Your child will be underprivileged. And parents are putting a lot of money into it, and unfortunately, they are also susceptible to the fact that as long as their children are seen to operate the machines, they have a feeling that their child have got a competence in the use of those machines.
Schools are keen to demonstrate pupils' computer competence. There's no better draw for a parents' evening. Courtwood Primary School in Surrey has one of the best pupil-computer ratios in the south-east corner.
Keep that down.
Yes.
Then with the other hand, press P. Keep
You
both
do that
down
for me, I shall drop my
Now you
handbag.
can take it off. And then you press Control, and you get the pixels, where the pixels up there. Now you can just press any of those, C, D, E, D, C, and R, F, D.
When the computers first arrived in schools, very often, nobody knew what to do with them. Teachers weren't trained, and there was no software. In the case of Courtwood, it was an enthusiastic teacher, Ron Gandolfo, who led the way.
I actually trained up some children, which of course they were immediately motivated and keen and geared up, and to actually show other members of staff how to use the micros, that they were naturally pleased to be able to do that. So I trained girls and boys up to set the machines up, to be able to load and run software, so that they would come in at 8:30 each morning, get the micros out of the cupboards and set them up, and run the software ready for the teacher and his or her class at the beginning of each day. So initially, it was the children that were actually teaching the staff.
But learning to load the software is only the very first step. What are the programs good for? In other words, what difference is it making to the learning process? The programs the children are using in this infant's class are just variations on traditional classroom work.
Never seen a white hat before on the white hat. You can't mind window. Yellow. Yellow. Black.
When people say to me, "Oh, why do you need computers?" we're not actually changing our style of teaching or the way we organise our classrooms. We're actually doing exactly the same things. There are lots of different things going on in the primary classroom, and this is just one more activity, so it actually enhances what we're doing. It helps.
Sorry.
Back at the parents' evening, they're being taught to use a more educational game by 8 and 9-year-olds.
Should someone come off the island and find your favourite?
She reckons we keep going, we'll come out standing on the This one, okay then, so that comes through.
Where do you want press space for?
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what you're doing?
Well, we're playing this game called Into the Unknown, which is like an adventure game. And you have a blank grid which resolves itself into a map. You start somewhere in the middle of the grid, and then the computer tells you where you are, and then you have to make the decision of where you want to go, and then the computer tells you what you found there. At the moment, we're stuck in the jungle, and we're losing points rapidly, whereas before, we were doing quite well. Yeah,
How did you learn to use it tonight? I mean, because you've just sat down...
Just by watching the girls and common sense.
And discussion, lots of discussion. Well, actually, we're quarrelling, but that's only because we were doing all right until we got stuck in the jungle, and now we're stuck in the jungle.
It's programs like Into the Unknown, where children are actually working in front of the computer together, discussing their work, and an awful lot of work goes on away from the computer, which is just as important, if not more important, because they're using textbooks. They go to the library for encyclopedias, reference books. An enormous amount of work can come out of a project which can be computer-based, but it's the work that goes on away from it as well.
Into the Unknown is a game based on the adventures of 15th century Portuguese explorers. It began life as a classroom project pack for secondary schools, before the micro came in. The computer in this case is simply a new prop for traditional classroom activity.
Before you do Into the Unknown, you have to do all things in a folder. Yeah, and you have Traveller's Tales and all things like that, and you have to learn things on the ship so when you do the journey, you know what to do and everything.
So you've got to decide how much food to take with you and water and all that sort of thing.
But you can't overload your ship, or otherwise you'll be sunk.
They're learning from fact sheets that go with...
Yes, and discussion and working out, well, if we're in jungle here, what should we do to get out of it, decision making. And drawing maps and remembering what we're doing next, learning to read this sheet, and, well, I should think you improve your reading quite well as well.
Yeah. 1,350 pounds of salt pork this time. Have you done that yet? Pork. Your score of this topic was Express Space Flight. Navigation now. Yeah, navigation 5. And then it's into the unknown. Right. The grid has been drawn over a map of Portugal. Each town is shown by a green star.
And certainly in primary schools, topic-based work and project-based work, of course, has been in the forefront of primary education. That's how lots of teachers operate.
By row 4, it's BB4. There.
Many of the things that we've long held dear in primary education, such as children taking responsibility for their own learning and children learning through doing, fit in very well with the use of the microcomputer. And I think in the primary schools we can build upon the philosophical and underlying attitudes of the teachers much better than we can in the secondary sector.
Do you want to store it?
Once the computer began to come into schools, it was quick to join maths and sciences as a boys' subject. The girls tend to be overlooked.
And I've boxed myself in.
How are you getting girls interested in computers?
Girls have taken a bit of a back seat, and of course it's we're being told perhaps by our advisors to watch out for that type of thing, so we're naturally encouraging girls to take as much interest as boys. So I have purposely had mixed boys and girls demonstrating on the computers this evening for that very reason.
I think it's much less of a problem in the primary school than it is at secondary level. I think the girls are prepared to fight for their place on the primary level, if you like. But at secondary, where they become much more concerned with traditional sex roles and so on, then many of the girls are tending to drop out. But I think at primary, provided we deliberately give an eye to what's going on and make quite sure that the girls aren't elbowed off, I think the girls will want to use them.
Some of the most successful uses of computers in schools depend on commercial rather than educational software. In Ron Gandolfo's top class, children are using a word processing package to write and edit their school magazine.
They had no fears or frustrations with handwriting, and consequently I think they can give their all into the thought processes, into actually what they want to write. And they actually have this purpose for writing because they know that it's going to be printed off and distributed and lots of people are going to read it. And that gives them great purpose.
But the use of word processors at such an early stage is bound to raise fears about the loss of handwriting skills.
We'll have enormous debates in schools just about that, like the Biro in the 60s. Should we allow that kind of device into school? And the answer is, we will have no choice, because they'll be out there, and this is one educational innovation that isn't stimulated directly from within. It's actually responding to what's changing outside.
No, you've got it wrong. Space. A special.
There is no educational philosophy behind the slogan, "A micro in every school." In fact, the government is touting an economic panacea rather than an educational revolution. The main beneficiaries of the Micros in Schools scheme have been 3 small British computer firms. The educational benefits of school computers vary. Whilst Cortwood uses computers in imaginative ways, it is not perfect or typical. Plenty of primary schools put computers to unimaginative and boring uses, for example, to do arithmetic drills or issue dinner tickets. And when we get to the secondary school, the Micro is often restricted to older boys, or if you're lucky, older girls and boys for exam classes. Much examined computer studies is a dreary mishmash of out-of-date industrial information, binary maths, and the learning of eccentric programming languages like BASIC. The chaotic situation in the schools, where a 10-year-old may do interesting programming projects and then wait 3 or more years before touching a computer again, is mirrored by the patchy provision of teacher training. At Croydon, they are trying to liberate the micro from the computer studies department. Here, secondary school teachers from all subject areas spend half a day a week, spread over 6 months, learning to teach a new subject called information technology.
Now, do we somehow chop this little lot up?
Why don't we leave a space here for the latest sports news? We can get that from Prestel or CFAX.
Yeah, OK.
Croydon's approach is to acquaint teachers, and therefore their pupils, with the information handling capabilities of the computer, using it as a tool to support their classroom work. They don't see the computer as just an object of study in itself.
Everybody, in a sense, I mean, all teachers ought to be teachers of information handling skills that they should use as they go along. So the history teachers should be using databases where they can actually get at primary sources. English teachers, obviously, the kind of thing we've been doing today would be quite valid as an English lesson, except that actually, from this approach, the pupils would have more power over the information. We're talking about information handling, not just receiving. It's not just comprehension, it's actually getting in there and editing and revising and getting things to fit in tight spaces and so on.
And I think you will have seen today, looking at some of the activities, that many of them have to spend a great deal of time away from the machine, even when they're using the machine. So when they're doing an activity as they are today in creating a newspaper, an awful lot of time is spent talking in groups, in planning, in discussing, in laying out pages, in looking at final products using the photocopier, and it's not all the time sitting at a keyboard. And I think there's this sometimes a worry in people's minds that information technology means children sitting in serried ranks, bashing keyboards, gazing like zombies at screens, and I hope that in the activities we're doing, this is clearly seen not to be the case.
Done. Well, can we just put that bottom bit on there?
Yeah.
I've got room here, look.
Yeah, to protest about rate capping.
Right, well, let's paste it up then.
In fact, one of the things that we would be keen to say is that often the link with mathematics and the physical sciences is not helpful, that those are not the teachers renowned for their own communication skills, and in many ways, if this activity were based in English departments, in the school libraries, where things like CFAX and Prestel have a much more natural place, then we will see the development of the subject into a much broader-based activity, so that in the long term, information technology could well become third major literacy after English and maths in our schools.
The notion of liberating the computers from the inarticulate maths and computer teachers is attractive. But information technology can't be mastered by devoting a half a day a week for a few months. In fact, the vast majority of teachers, including the computer specialists, do not understand the fundamentals of modern computing. And this worries them because it is now clear to teachers that the ability to use information technology will very soon be as important as reading, writing, or arithmetic. The teachers know that they don't even understand these new areas well enough to apply the new skills themselves, let alone teach them to their pupils.
If any training is being given in IT, it is totally inadequate for the purposes of teaching the subject.
There's a lip service being paid to in-service training. It's teachers having really to do it themselves. Many courses now are being set up whereby teachers have to teach teachers and have to pay for the privilege of doing it by having to give up time and yet still have to carry their own commitments outside of school. I think that is very worrying.
The thing that worries me is that the computer keyboard is going to take the place of an ordinary typewriter keyboard, i.e. that a girl will be seen again in a secondary role. You look at all the posters, etc., the IT posters, it's always the man standing there in the white coat and the little girl sitting at the keyboard actually doing the work while he's there looking important.
I think the Space Invader and the Defender games have had a lot to do with it as well. Boys see this and I think they're far more aggressive. They tend to go for this sort of game far more than girls. And girls sort of shy away from it. And I don't think that helps. I think we have to be positive in our discrimination to try and encourage girls and encourage parents to help girls to use computers. I think they have been discouraged by this.
From my point of view, there are certainly so many courses going on that aren't perhaps adequately prepared, aren't adequately programmed. So really we feel in a bit of a state of muddle. We are very well motivated to learn, otherwise we wouldn't spend out of school time as well as our sort of 1.5 hours of school time on the course. Each week it's 3.5 hours of our time on the course. So we are highly motivated to learn something. But I just don't think government or education authorities or whoever are supposed to be organising these courses are putting enough resources into them.
Teachers very badly need proper training and the time and facilities to support the development of skills in information technology. Apart from learning about a rapidly changing area, teachers face a variety of hard questions which they have to solve themselves and are expected to answer when parents ask them. For example, which computers should be bought? Which software is valuable and useful? In fact, both parents and teachers now find themselves equally unable to answer these same questions.
Do you feel that there is enough commercially available educational software at the moment?
For the computers we have in school?
Computers in general?
There is an enormous amount of educational software available, and part of the job of the Teachers' Centre in Croydon is in fact that they stock a far greater range than we have here. So it's our job as teachers to go to the Teachers' Centre, see what is actually available and pick and choose the software that we would like to use in our schools for a particular situation.
As parents, we don't have that facility. You know, we've got to go into WH Smith's or wherever. And I don't feel there's enough available at the moment for the educational side.
One of the messages we're getting from publishers currently is that educational software in the home market is not by and large good news. Anything that's got educational on it doesn't sell. Anything that's got adventure or game or something that looks like Space Invaders on the front of it sells like hotcakes.
Is there a risk that parents are actually being conned into getting some stuff for home use that isn't really up to scratch?
Oh, there's no question of risk about it. It's a fact. It's good old-fashioned 1950s educational technology tacked on to new technology.
We thought of calling this series Making the Least of the Micro. The politicians made a variety of attractive promises when they pushed the micros into schools, but their minds were on making education cheaper, the job market, and supporting British manufacturers. I believe that computers could, with proper software and adequate teacher training, radically improve education. But the current position is that we're throwing shoddy software at the half-price micros that were touted to the schools. At the same time, there are now more than 2 million microcomputers in British homes. Many bought by parents hoping to help children with their schoolwork or hoping to help them become computer literate. Already many of these parents are disillusioned, and they're right to be so. I believe the only way of realising the long-term educational promise of the new technologies is for us to be fierce in our opposition to pointless or low-quality applications of computers when we meet them in schools or the home.